Kethar had lived for 90 years, and in all that time he had never once felt afraid. His people, the Veli, had removed fear from their minds long ago. They believed fear was a weakness, a flaw that held lesser species back from true progress. The Veli were diplomats and thinkers, beings of logic and calm. They did not run, they did not panic. They simply observed and calculated. At least that was what Kethalar had always believed about himself. He stood at his station aboard the coalition vessel's steadfast horizon, his forearms folded neatly behind his back as he watched the human crew go about their duties. The ship was a joint operation carrying members from 6 different species across the galaxy. Kethalar was there as a diplomatic attaché, a junior representative meant to observe and report back to his government. It was supposed to be a simple assignment. Safe, boring. Even the alarm changed everything. Red lights flashed across the bridge and a sharp sound cut through the quiet hum of the engines. Keeler's compound eyes flickered toward the main view screen as data began streaming. Across it, a distress beacon. Someone was calling for help. Commander. Lisa Hang rose from her chair at the center of the bridge. She was a small woman by human standards, with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Kethalar had studied humans during his training. They were strange creatures full of contradictions. They laughed and cried, loved and hated, all within the same day. They were messy and chaotic and utterly confusing. But when Lisa Hang spoke, her voice was steady as stone. Report, she said. Lieutenant Danny Ortiz, a young man with brown skin and quick hands, pulled up the signal on his console. It's a colony ship, Commander, the Pilgrim's Rest. 40,000 civilians on board, mostly families heading to the outer settlements. Their engines are dead and they're drifting in the Drift Nebula. The words hit Kethalar like a physical blow. The Drift Nebula, he knew that place. Every species in the coalition knew it. The Drift Nebula was hunting ground for the Harrow. The Harrow were nightmares given form. They were a species of predators who existed only to consume and destroy. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They swept through sectors like a plague, leaving nothing but empty ships and silent worlds behind them. 12 species had been wiped out by the Harrow in the last 100 years alone, and the Pilgrim's Rest was drifting right into their territory. Kethar expected Commander Huang to contact the nearest military outpost. He expected her to send a message and wait for backup. That was the logical response. That was what any sensible commander would do. Instead, she turned to her helmsman and said, "Set a course, maximum speed." Enon Marie Delray, a pale woman with red hair and freckles across her nose, did not hesitate. Her fingers danced across her console and the ship hummed as the engines powered up. Course laid in. Commander, we can be there in 2 hours. Make it 90 minutes, Lisa said. Kethalar felt something twist inside his thorax. It was an unfamiliar sensation, cold and sharp like ice forming in his blood. His mandibles clicked together without his permission, a sound his species made only in moments of great distress. "Commander," he said, stepping forward. His voice came out higher than he intended. "The Harrow patrol routes indicate that there are at least 3 hunter packs operating in that sector. Our ship is not equipped for combat against that kind of force. The logical course of action would be to contact the military, and allow them to handle this situation. Lisa turned to look at him. Her eyes were dark and calm, and there was something in them that Cathalar could not understand. And how long would that take? I say, how long until they mobilize a fleet, plan their approach, and finally reach those people? Keith ran the calculations. In his mind, approximately 14 hours. Assuming optimal response time, those civilians don't have 14 hours, Lisa said. Simply, they might not even have 2. But we cannot possibly save them, Keeler insisted. The odds of success are high. Don't care about the odds, Lisa cut him off. Her voice was not angry, but it was firm in a way that left no room for argument. There are 40,000 people on that ship, families, children. They sent out a call for help, and we heard it. That means we go, Chief Engineer Carlos Vega's voice crackled over the intercom from deep in the ship's engine room. Commander, I'm pushing the reactors as hard as I can. You'll have your 90 minutes, but the engines are going to complain about it. Let them complain, Lisa replied. Just get us there. Keeler stood frozen at his station as the ship lurched into motion. Around him, the human crew moved with purpose and focus. Danny was already analyzing the nebula's sensor shadows, looking for the best approach vector. Marie was running calculations for emergency maneuvers. Even the junior officers were checking their equipment and preparing for what lay ahead. None of them looked afraid, or rather, Cathalar realized with a start, all of them looked afraid. He could see it in the tightness of their shoulders, the quick glances they exchanged, the way their hands trembled slightly as they worked. They were terrified. Every single one of them knew they might be flying to their deaths, and yet they went anyway. Keithar did not understand. His people had spent thousands of years removing fear from their minds because they believed it was a weakness. Fear made you hesitate. Fear made you fail. Fear was the enemy of progress and reason, but these humans carried their fear with them like a familiar burden. They did not let it stop them. They did not let it control them. They simply acknowledged it and kept moving forward. For the first time in his 90 years, Cathalar felt the cold grip of terror wrap around his heart. His species had 2 hearts, and both of them were beating faster than they ever had before. His legs wanted to run. His mind wanted to hide. Every instinct screamed at him to find a way off this ship before it was too late. But the humans did not run. The humans did not hide. And as Cathalar watched Commander Lisa Hang stand tall at the center of her bridge, facing down impossible odds, with nothing but determination in her eyes, he realized something that shook him to his core. His people had not evolved beyond fear. They had simply forgotten how to be brave. The steadfast horizon dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Drift Nebula, and Cathalar's fear became something solid and heavy in his chest. The view screen showed the colony ship Pilgrim's Rest hanging in the darkness like a wounded animal, its lights flickering, its engines cold and dead. But that was not what made Cathalar's blood turn to ice. 3 hero cruisers surrounded the helpless vessel. The Harrow ships were ugly things built for one purpose only. They looked like jagged pieces of black metal, welded together by madmen. All sharp angles and brutal lines. Boarding tubes had already extended from each ship, punching through the colony ship's hull like needles into flesh. The Harrow were inside, Life signs on the Pilgrim's Rest. Danny reported, his voice tight. 40,000. At first count, but the numbers are dropping. Commander, they're killing them. Keeler's mandibles clicked. Rapidly, a sound of pure distress he could not control. We are too late, he whispered. We should retreat and report what we have found. There is nothing we can do. Here, nobody listened to him. Commander. Lisa Huang leaned forward in her chair, her eyes fixed on the view screen. Marie. Target their boarding tubes, cut them off from the colony ship. Danny, I need firing solutions on their engines. Not here to destroy them, we're here to slow them down long enough to get those people out. Commander Ketheler tried. Again, this is not a battle we can win. 3 hero cruisers against 1 coalition vessel. The mathematics simply do not support. Attaché Lisa said. Without looking at him, I understand that your people value logic above all else, but sometimes logic isn't enough. Sometimes you have to do what's right, even when the numbers say you'll fail. Carlos Vega's voice came through the intercom, rough and tired from pushing the engines so hard. Commander, I've got everything we have ready to go, but I should warn you, if we take too much damage, we won't have enough power to run and fight at the same time. Then we won't run, Lisa said. Simply, the ship surged forward. Ketheler grabbed the edge of his console as the Steadfast Horizon dove straight toward the Harrow Formation. His species had a word for this kind of behavior, a term used to describe creatures who ran toward death instead of away from it. The Veloxi considered it a form of madness, a failure of the survival instinct. But as he watched the human crew work around him, Ketheler began to wonder if his people had been wrong about many things. Marie's fingers flew across her weapons console. 3 precise shots lanced out from the Steadfast Horizon, striking the boarding tubes where they connected to the colony ship. Metal tore and atmosphere vented into space as the connections were severed. On the view screen, Ketheler could see Harrow bodies tumbling into the void, their boarding parties suddenly cut off from their ships. Harrow responded instantly. All 3 cruisers turned away from the colony ship, their weapons powering up. With an angry red glow, the largest ship broadcast a message that needed no translation. It was a sound of pure hatred, a promise of pain and death. They're coming for us, Danny said. All 3 of them. Good, Lisa replied. That means they're not on the Pilgrim's Rest anymore. Carlos, I need more speed. You're going to burn out the engines. Commander, then we burn out the engines. Those people need time to escape. First Harrow missiles streaked toward them, bright points of light against the darkness. Marie activated the countermeasures, and the space around the Steadfast Horizon bloomed with flares and electronic noise. Most of the missiles went wide, confused by the interference. But one got through. The ship shook as the explosion tore into their port side. Ketheler was thrown against his console, his exoskeleton cracking against the hard metal edge. Alarm screamed. Sparks rained from damaged systems. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear crew members shouting, "Damage reports. Hull breach on Deck 7, Danny called out. Emergency bulkheads are holding, but we've lost the secondary sensor array. Keep moving, Lisa ordered. Marie returned fire, aim for their weapon system. The Steadfast Horizon was smaller and faster than the hero cruisers, and Marie used every advantage they had. She danced the ship through the enemy Formation, firing shot after shot with deadly accuracy. One Harrow cruiser lost its main cannon, another had its missile launchers torn apart, but there were still 3 of them and only one steadfast horizon. Kethaler watched from his station, his heart's pounding so hard he could feel them in his throat. Fear consumed him, but he found that he could not look away. The humans around him were bleeding and exhausted, their ship falling apart around them, and yet they kept fighting. Danny took a piece of debris to the shoulder and kept calling out, targeting Data through gritted teeth. Marie's hands were steady even as blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead. Carlos worked miracles in the engine room, keeping them moving when by all rights they should have been dead in space, and Lisa Huang stood at the center of it all, unbreakable and unyielding, giving orders with a voice that never wavered. The Pilgrim's Rest is moving, Danny reported suddenly. Their emergency thrusters came online. They're heading for the jump point for the first time since the battle began. Kethaler felt something other than fear. It was small and fragile, but it was there. Hope. Then we keep the Harrow busy, Lisa said. Whatever it takes, we give those people time to escape. The steadfast horizon dove back into the fight, one small ship against 3 monsters, and Kethaler found himself moving to help, his claws flying across his console as he tried to find anything he could do to keep them alive just a little longer. He was still terrified, but somehow standing with these humans, the fear did not feel quite so crushing anymore. The steadfast horizon was dying. Keeler could feel it in the way the ship groaned around him, in the flickering lights and the constant wail of alarms that nobody bothered to silence anymore. Another Harrow missile had struck them moments ago, this one punching through their lower decks and tearing away a quarter of their hull plating. The air smelled like burning metal and something worse, something Kethaler did not want to think about. On the view screen, the Pilgrim's Rest continued its slow crawl toward the jump point. The colony ship was hurt and limping, but it was moving 40,000 lives, inching toward safety, one agonizing meter at a time. The Harrow would not let them go easily. 2 of the enemy cruisers had taken heavy damage from the steadfast horizon's attacks. One was venting atmosphere from a dozen wounds in its hull. The other had lost most of its weapons and was falling back, no longer able to fight. But the third cruiser, the largest and most dangerous of them, was still coming. Commander, Danny said, his voice. Blood had dried on his face from the gash on his forehead, and his left arm hung uselessly at his side where debris had broken it, but he was still at his station, still fighting. The lead Harrow ship is changing course. They're going after the colony ship. Lisa Hang's jaw tightened. Marie, can you stop them? Marie shook her head, frustration and exhaustion written across her face. Our main weapons are offline. We've got some secondary cannons left, but they won't even scratch that thing's armor at this range. Then we get closer, Lisa said. Carlos's voice came through the intercom, weaker now than it had been before. Commander, the engines are barely holding together. If I push them any harder, we'll lose propulsion entirely. How much longer can you give me? There was a pause. Then Carlos laughed. Tired and broken sound. For you, Commander, as long as you need. The ship lurched forward, engines screaming in protest. Kethar felt himself pressed back against his console as they accelerated, closing the gap between them and the massive Hero cruiser. His compound eyes tracked the enemy ship, watching as it grew larger and larger on the view screen. His fear was a living thing now, a creature coiled around his heart and squeezing tight. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to hide, to find some way off this doomed vessel before it was too late. The Veloxi had removed fear from their minds because they understood how crippling it could be. Fear made you weak, fear made you useless, but Cathalar was not useless. The realization came to him suddenly, cutting through the terror like a blade. Through fog, his claws were already moving across his console, pulling up communications arrays and signal frequencies. The Veloxi were not warriors, they were diplomats, scientists, builders. Their technology was generations ahead of most species in the galaxy, including the Hero. Commander Cathalar said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. I can disrupt their coordination. The Hero use a simple frequency network to communicate between ships. If I can jam that signal, their command ship will not be able to direct the others. Lisa turned to look at him, and there was something new in her eyes. Something like respect. Can you do it from here? Yes, but I will need to redirect power from our own communications array. We will not be able to call for help. We weren't going to call for help anyway, Lisa said with a grim smile. Do it. Cathar's claws flew across the interface. It was complex work, the kind of technical challenge that would normally take a team of Veloxi engineers hours to complete. He did it in minutes, his fear somehow sharpening his mind instead of clouding it. The terror was still there, cold and heavy in his chest, but he used it as fuel. He let it drive him forward instead of holding him back. The jamming signal went active on the view screen. The Hero formation began to falter. The two damaged cruisers, suddenly off from their command ship, stopped their pursuit entirely. They drifted in confusion, their simple minds unable to function without orders. Even the lead cruiser slowed, its movements becoming hesitant and uncertain. It's working, Danny breathed. They're confused, not for long, Marie warned. They'll figure out what we did and switch to backup frequencies. We've got maybe 5 minutes. Then we use those 5 minutes, Lisa said. All power to weapons, everything we have left. We hit them now, while they're blind. The steadfast horizon opened fire with everything it had. Secondary cannons blazed. Missile tubes that Cathalar had thought were empty somehow found ammunition. Even the damaged main weapon coughed out one final shot, a lance of energy that struck the Hero command ship directly in its engine section. The enemy cruiser shuddered. Explosions rippled across its hull, but it did not fall. The Hero built their ships to survive punishment that would destroy lesser vessels. Even wounded, even confused, the command ship was still dangerous. It turned toward them, its remaining weapons powering up. Brace for impact, Lisa ordered. Hero fired. The world became noise and fire and pain. Cathalar was thrown across the bridge, his body crashing into the far wall with a crack that told him more of his exoskeleton had broken. Smoke filled his lungs, his vision blurred. Somewhere in the chaos he heard screaming, though he could not tell if it was human or his own voice. When the smoke cleared, the bridge was in ruins. Consoles sparked and burned. Bodies lay still on the deck. The view screen was cracked but still functioning, showing the hero command. Ship looming over them like a predator. Over wounded prey, but beyond the enemy. Ship Kethallar could see something that made his heart swell with an emotion he did not have a name for. The Pilgrims. Rest had reached the jump point as he watched the colony ship flickered once and then vanished, jumping to safety. With 40,000 lives on board, they had done it against all odds, against every calculation. They had saved those people. Keeler lay on the deck of the broken bridge, surrounded by injured humans facing certain death, and for the first time in his 90 years, he smiled. The steadfast horizon drifted in the darkness, broken and bleeding atmosphere into the void. Half the ship was without power. Life support was failing on 3 decks. The engines made a sound like a dying animal every time Carlos tried to coax, and he thrust from them, but they were still alive. Kethallar pulled himself up from the deck, his cracked exoskeleton screaming in protest with every movement around him. The surviving crew members were doing the same, helping each other stand, checking for injuries, refusing to give up. Even now he counted 7 people still conscious on the bridge, including Commander Lisa Huang. Lisa had a deep cut across her cheek, and she moved with the careful slowness of someone who had broken ribs. But her eyes were still sharp, still focused, still searching for a way to save her crew. Danny, she said, status report. Danny Ortiz had somehow made it back to his console, his broken arm hanging at his side while his good hand flew across the controls. The colony ship made it through the jump point. Commander, they're safe. A ragged cheer went up from the surviving crew. It was a weak sound, exhausted in pain, but it was real. They had accomplished their mission. 40,000 people would because of what they had done here, but their celebration was short-lived. The Harrow command ship is still out there, Marie reported from her damaged weapons console. It's hurt, but it's coming around for another pass. And Commander, we don't have anything left to fight with. Kethallar turned his compound eyes toward the view screen. The massive hero cruiser was indeed turning its hull, scarred and burning in places, but still intact. The other 2 damaged cruisers had recovered from their confusion and were falling into formation behind their leader. 3 ships against 1 crippled vessel. The mathematics were simple. The steadfast horizon could not win this fight. They could not even run. Carlos, Lisa said into the intercom, tell me you have something left. Carlos's voice came back thin and tired. I can give you impulse power, Commander, enough to move, maybe even enough to limp toward the jump point, but we'll never make it before they catch us. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was no fear in them, only acceptance and determination. Then we don't run, we face them. Commander, one of the junior officers said, her voice shaking. What do we do? Lisa turned to look at her crew. These were her people, the men and women who had followed her into impossible odds without hesitation. They were bruised and bleeding, exhausted and afraid, but they were still standing. We do what we've always done, Lisa said quietly. We hold the line, we buy time. Maybe help is coming. Maybe the colony ship sent a message when they jumped, or maybe this is where our story ends. She paused, looking at each of them in turn. Either way, I am proud of every single one of you. You saved 40,000 lives today, no matter what happens next. That matters. Keeler felt something strange happening inside him. His fear was still there, still cold and heavy and real, but it no longer controlled him. Instead, it had become something else, something he had no word for in his language. The humans had a word for it, though. They called it courage, Commander Kethaler said, stepping forward on unsteady legs. I have an idea. Lisa turned to look at him. I'm listening, the hero commanded. Ship took significant damage to its engine section from our last attack. I believe I can calculate a targeting solution for one final shot, if Marie can get any weapon operational at all. Marie shook her head. The main cannons are completely dead. All I have left is the emergency torpedo tube, and it only has one charge remaining. Quote, one shot, Kethaler said. That is all we need. Danny pulled up sensor data on his console, his broken arm trembling with the effort. He might be right. Commander, the command ship's rear armor is weakened where we hit them before. Direct strike to their reactor could trigger a chain reaction, could trigger. Lisa repeated. Not will trigger. The probability of success is approximately 12%, Keeler admitted. However, if we succeed, the destruction of the command ship will cause the other two cruisers to scatter. Without leadership, the Harrow cannot function effectively. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, then she laughed, a sound that was somehow warm despite the hopelessness of their situation. 12%. Those are terrible odds. They are. Kethaler agreed. My people have done more with less, Carlos said over the intercom. There was something new in his voice, now a spark of defiance that refused to die. I can route auxiliary power to the torpedo tube. Give Marie one shot just like you said, and I can calculate the trajectory. Kethaler added, my species excels at precise calculations. I will not miss. Lisa looked at him, and something passed between them. It was understanding, respect, and perhaps even friendship. You know, this could be it, Attaché. This could be the end for all of us. Kethar straightened his broken body as best he could. Commander, I have spent 90 years believing that fear was a weakness to be eliminated. Today, your crew has shown me that I was wrong. Fear is not the enemy. Surrender is the enemy, and I do not intend to surrender. Lisa smiled, and for a moment her exhaustion seemed to fade. Then let's give them something to remember us by. The crew moved with renewed purpose. Carlos worked miracles in the engine room, pulling power from systems that should have been completely dead. Marie prepared the torpedo tube, her hands steady despite everything. Danny fed sensor data to Kethaler, who processed it with the speed and precision his species was known for, and the Harrow command ship drew closer, unaware that its prey still had teeth. Targeting solution calculated, Kethaler announced. Probability of critical hit has improved to 17% based on current trajectory. Still terrible odds, Danny muttered, but not zero, Lisa said. She placed her hand on Marie's shoulder. Take the shot. Marie fired, the torpedo streak across the void, a single point of light carrying the hopes of everyone aboard the steadfast horizon. Keeler watched it fly, his compound eyes tracking its path. With perfect clarity, the Harrow command ship tried to evade, tried to shoot it down, but it was too slow and too damaged. The torpedo struck the weakened armor section, exactly where Kethaler had calculated. For one terrible moment, Nothing happened. Then the Harrow command ship began to die. The Harrow command ship did not explode all at once. Instead, it died slowly, like a great beast finally falling after taking too many wounds. Fire bloomed from its engine section, spreading through the hull in a cascade of destruction. Secondary explosions rippled across its surface, tearing the ship apart piece by piece. The view screen of the steadfast horizon filled with light as the enemy vessel collapsed in on itself. When the light faded, there was nothing left but debris. The two remaining hero cruisers hesitated, without their leader to guide them. Their simple predator minds could not process what had happened. For a long moment, they simply drifted, weapons powered down as if waiting for orders that would never come. Then they ran. The cruisers turned and fled into the depths of the nebula, their engines burning hot as they retreated from the battered coalition ship that had somehow defeated them. Within minutes they had vanished entirely, leaving the steadfast horizon alone in the darkness. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The bridge was silent except for the crackling of damaged systems and the labored breathing of injured crew members. Then Danny let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "We did it," he said, his voice cracking. "We actually did it." The tension broke. Crew members embraced each other, tears streaming down their faces. Someone was laughing. Someone else was praying. Marie slumped over her console, her body shaking with relief and exhaustion. Carlos's voice came through the intercom, weak but triumphant, saying something about the engines holding together through sheer stubbornness. Ketheler stood apart from the celebration, his compound eyes fixed on the field of debris that had once been the Harrow command ship. His exoskeleton was cracked in 7 places. His body ached in ways he had never experienced before. But he was alive. They were all alive. Commander Lisa Huang limped over to stand beside him. Her face was pale from blood loss, and she leaned heavily against a console for support, but her eyes were bright with something that looked like joy. "That was a hell of a shot at," she said. Keeler turned to look at her. "I merely calculated the trajectory. It was Marie who fired and Carlos who provided the power. The credit belongs to your crew." "The credit belongs to all of us," Lisa corrected. "Including you." They stood together in silence for a moment, watching the debris drift through space. Somewhere out there, the Pilgrim's Rest was safe, its 40,000 passengers completely unaware of how close they had come to death. They would never know the names of the people who had saved them. They would never know about the fear and the pain and the sacrifice, but they would live, and that was enough. "Why did you do it?" Keithar asked suddenly. The question had been building inside him since this whole nightmare began, and he could not hold it back any longer. "Why did you come here? Why did you risk your ship and your crew for strangers you had never met?" Lisa was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Because that's who we are," she said. "Humans. I mean, we're not the strongest species in the galaxy. We're not the smartest or the most advanced. We're fragile and emotional, and we make mistakes constantly." She paused, a small smile crossing her face. "But we don't leave people behind. When someone calls for help, we answer. Even when it's dangerous. Even when the odds say we'll fail. Because that's what it means to be human." Keithar considered her words. His people had spent thousands of years trying to become perfect beings, removing emotions and weaknesses in pursuit of pure logic. They had believed that fear was a flaw, something to be eliminated, but watching these humans, these fragile and emotional creatures, Cathalar understood that his people had made a terrible mistake. Fear was not a flaw. Fear was a reminder that some things mattered enough to be afraid of losing, and courage was not the absence of fear. Courage was feeling that fear and choosing to act anyway. The rescue fleet arrived 3 hours later. Word of the Pilgrim's Rest had spread quickly, and ships from 6 different species had responded to the call. They found the Steadfast Horizon drifting among the wreckage of the Harrow command ship, barely holding together, but refusing to die. The story spread even faster. Within days, every species in the coalition knew what had happened in the Drift Nebula. They knew about the tiny coalition ship that had charged into Harrow territory to save 40,000 lives. They knew about the desperate battle, the impossible odds, the final shot that had turned defeat into victory, and they knew about the Veli attaché who had stood with the humans when it mattered most. Cathalar's report to his government was unlike anything the Veloxi diplomatic corps had ever received. He did not simply describe the events of the battle. He wrote about fear and courage, about emotion and sacrifice, about everything his people had tried so hard to forget. His words sparked debates that would continue for generations as the Veloxi began to question whether their path toward perfection had actually led them away from something important. But Cathalar did not wait for those debates to conclude. He had made his decision. You want to stay? Lisa asked when he told her. They were in the medical bay of the rescue ship, both of them bandaged and recovering from their injuries with us. I have spent 90 years observing life from a safe distance. Keeler said, I do not wish to observe anymore. I wish to live. I wish to feel. I wish to stand beside beings who have shown me what true courage means. Lisa studied him for a long moment, then she extended her hand, a human gesture of friendship and respect. Welcome to the crew, Cathalar. He took her hand in his claw, feeling the warmth of her skin against his cold exoskeleton. It was strange and unfamiliar, like so many things about these humans. But it felt right. Years later, when historians wrote about the battle of the Drift Nebula, they would focus on the tactics and the technology, the political implications, and the strategic consequences. They would analyze the odds and the outcomes, trying to understand how such an impossible victory had been achieved. Cathar knew they would never truly understand because the victory had not been won by calculations or technology. It had been won by something far simpler and far more powerful. It had been won by ordinary beings who felt fear and chose to be brave anyway. It had been won by the simple truth that Lisa Huang had spoken on the bridge of her dying ship. That was who humans were, and now, standing at their flank, it was who Cathalar had chosen to become. He had confronted fear for the first time with humanity beside him, and in that fear, he had found something his ancestors had lost long ago. He had found his courage.